I think it's very noticeable that boy bands have been marketed pretty similarly over the years, and almost all of them follow a heartthrob for teenage girls formula. You hear the term boy band, and there's this like immediate picture for most regular public people of this screaming, crying, love-struck hysteria. That culture, and so much of the reason for that picture is because of Beatlemania. And that was sort of proof that a group of talented boys or men could bring about so much obsession and success if they were marketed correctly. Industry people suddenly wanted to tap into this very specific market of teenage girls especially because they view their only trait as boy crazy and love struck. So if you can put something right in front of them to bring out that behavior, in their minds, you're selling millions.
I have seen tears, tantrums, meltdowns, all from teenage girls, and they are absolutely besotted.
The young straight female becomes a marketing goldmine, but it didn't stay that way.
It's not that hard to grasp anymore. There's lots of queer people in this fandom. This is where they feel safe. This is where they have each other.
I definitely think that over time we saw a lot of proof that this heartthrob for teenage girls formula could work and be very beneficial. For example, in the early 2010s with the Bieber fever craze.
When hype becomes hyperventilation, it's Bieber pitch. Well before dawn, at least 5,000 teens and tweens turned out to see the 16-year-old sensation.
They managed to draw up this massive audience of young, straight teenage girls with this like perfect image of a attractive boy writing sweet, lovey, and heartbreaky anthems. And those anthems were what was making these girls feel like heard and understood and almost allowed to be emotional, almost allowed to be a teenage girl.
I was very not like other girls before. I liked 70s and 80s music, and I never listened to the radio. And then One Direction came along, and I was like, oh shit, I'm allowed to like these things, and it doesn't step on my femininity or my masculinity or whatever you want to call it. Like, it was a big, it was really big in that because it was the first like really girly thing other than like Barbies and stuff that when you were a little kid that was really into.
I've been talking or typing so much about how I feel like a lot of what drew people to them, especially in the very beginning, was how like young teen girl oriented they were. So then we all felt like, oh, we're allowed to be teenage girls, we're allowed to be young girls, we're allowed to be excited and hysterical and all those things that are very like stereotypical and ended up becoming harmful. It gave them the room to exist as something that anywhere else is not that tolerated or understood or comfortable. So if these fandoms are where they're allowed to be that way and allowed to find each other, they're always going to be there every time. And it's absolutely no different with One Direction. From the very, very start, One Direction was definitely set up to be idolized by an audience of straight cisgender women. And that very idea held them together so completely, at least in the first like 3-ish years of them being a band. Boy bands are marketed with a majority teenage female public in mind, and the assumption was clearly that these female teens are all heterosexual and therefore the band should be sold to them as romantic interests. This heteronormativity made LGBTQ plus fans feel like they were not seen, like they didn't matter, and even made them feel unwelcome. One Direction are so fascinating to learn about because they weren't just being pushed as this like collective idea of a romantic interest. Instead, they fell into these very individual band roles that were present in every corner and everywhere for their entire career. They were handcrafted almost like an object. As horrible as it is to say, it's like the reality. They were handcrafted almost like objects to appeal to a bunch of different types of straight women. I think it was a calculated attempt to create a system where people would pick favorites.
But I think it's really interesting how they like seem to be trying to target a different type of girl with each guy. It's like, oh, Zayn's the bad boy, and Harry's the hot one, and Niall's like the funny boy next door. As an adult now, I'm like, oh my God, they made these like 17-year-old boys put on this whole persona.
The first beginning, I was just like, yeah, you know, Zayn's the mysterious one. And I look at him like, oh my God, that's so awful. Like, why was I? And like, I feel bad for like feeding into it, especially now that they've grown up and you see how different they are. Like, especially like Harry.
And I find it really hard to talk about these band roles that One Direction fell into. I think it's a hard conversation to have because on one hand, we know that it was harmful for them. It blurred into their real lives so much that it caused so much stress and pain for them. It caused negative media attention, unhealthy coping skills in their personal lives. But on the other hand, it was genius.
I mean, I do give them credit for how well they marketed them. It was insane.
I don't know, but they did something with their marketing back in the day.
It was almost like they're offering their audience variety on a silver platter. They're like, don't just love this idol, this heartthrob idol because he's attractive. You get to pick one with your favorite traits. Why are they your favorite? Who does that make you?
Louis has always been my favorite just because he was like so, at the time he was so like loud and funny and like seemed very kind as well.
I used to be a Liam girl.
No way.
You know, it was because I was the mother direction of my friend group. I was the responsible kid, and I was like, oh, and I also like a man in plaid. Let's be real.
I was like a Louis girl from the beginning, just like you.
Niall was like the first person because like my whole thing was like, oh, I love that he has blue eyes, like that he's blonde, you know.
Liam was my favorite.
Liam, wow.
Yeah, I loved him. I loved his voice. I just loved how like how he was like the daddy directioner.
There would be these like We Heart It pictures and different images of like each One Direction boy's style and how to dress like that certain boy's like girlfriend. Images laying out and dividing their specific personalities and like coming up with code words and nicknames for that specific personality. Zayn mysterious, Harry cheeky, Liam sensible. It's so crazy to look back on how calculated all of that was. And calculated in an attempt to sell music and gain numbers.
I think right now as well, like if we think about Harry Styles, for example, I think they're like, if you don't know a lot about him, you're just like, oh yeah, he's that womanizer, he dates older women, blah, 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 blah. But if you're like keyed in at all, you know that that's like something that is being told to the public, it's being marketed to the public. And I think it's the same thing with like One Direction, because like when I watch the video diaries of them being in X Factor, they're so like, they're children, they're just like having fun, and they're all being like, Louis the Joker,
Liam is the smart one, Harry is the flirt, Zayn is vain, see what I did there, Niall is the funny one.
I think I overuse the word interesting a lot personally, but what makes this so interesting is that the conversation isn't about One Direction's marketing failing. It clearly didn't fail. It changed, but it didn't fail. It worked in the beginning. They were selling millions of pieces of merchandise and tickets and music and having millions of streams and breaking records everywhere all the time, even in the earliest days of being a band. So I just don't think that anyone can ever say that this type of branding and marketing tactic wasn't effective at all, because that's not true. And looking back on all of that as someone who's in the present now, looking at the past, it's so crazy how you can see and pinpoint exactly how for straight cisgender women this band was for, to the point where, you know, throughout the years, people who were queer were kind of using One Direction as a safety blanket.
It was nice that they were being marketed as so straight because no one ever assumed that I was queer. It was like a really nice cover that I could explore myself in these spaces and explore so much of queer discourse while feeling very safe, because no one was going to assume it was a queer space because of the marketing.
Being a fan of them, I was like, this is a safe thing to do because I'd never actually have to confront whether or not it's like an attraction or just that I like their vibe.
Once I realized I like girls as well, it was also a way that I like, because I didn't really want to come out to my family or anything. So like in a way, really being obsessed with One Direction felt like even though I wasn't doing it in a heterosexual way or whatever, like it did feel like this, almost like a shield in a way, that like my parents would be like, oh look, she's boy crazy, she's obsessed with One Direction, never mind the fact that she's not trying to date guys.
They were indulging in this thing that was so clearly to the public for straight cis women, to the point where it's like, I can convince my family I'm not gay because I'm such a big One Direction stan, and that's such a specific type of person. I have this gold mine of a safety blanket. I can't be gay because I love them and I'm in their fandom. And being able to use being a One Direction fan as an excuse to not be gay or to convince yourself you're not gay just goes to show, you know, how specific this target to the public was. So if this very calculated, specific branding and marketing was working in the same way for years, you just like start to wonder where a change occurred. Rainbow Direction was a project that came during a rough period for queer One Direction fans, under the stress of constant homophobia. It began in 2013 on Tumblr, with a One Direction fan named Kat, who was over the homophobia and lack of queer visibility around the fandom. So I managed to get an interview with Kat, the original Rainbow Direction founder. Oh my goodness. I think for this part, I just want to read something that she said about homophobia. Of course, there was the regular kind of homophobia you'll find anywhere, and is considered as casual, where other fans weren't necessarily actively homophobic, but would say stuff like, "that's so gay," or "no homo." And then One Direction, like every other boy band most probably, had some gay rumors. The debate about those rumors got pretty heated in 2013, and there were a few fans who were adamant that they needed, in their own words, to defend the boys against these accusations. Some called the rumors vicious. These words and that attitude of gay rumors being seen as possibly the worst thing that could happen to someone did have a very negative impact on the LGBTQ+ people in the fandom, who, whatever they believed, felt really hurt by it. But most importantly, it wasn't just the fans. Female teens who make up the majority of boy band fandom are generally quite open-minded. It was also everyone and everything around it. The press, other celebrities, the marketing narrative, and then there was the incident at some point between One Direction and competing boy band The Wanted, where one of The Wanted used the hashtags Narnia and It Gets Better in reference to the gay rumors, which was a really awful thing to do, as hashtag It Gets Better is meant to support young LGBTQ+ people, and what they'd see in that tag now was a homophobic taunt. Luckily, that tweet was taken down later, but that incident was sort of a final straw that led me to start the Take Me Home from Narnia blog on Tumblr. The goal was to call out the sometimes intentional and evil homophobia, but oftentimes unintentional, casually homophobic remarks we encountered in the fandom, but also in the press, and challenge the heteronormativity of it all. I feel like it would be really hard for someone who wasn't there to believe that all of that homophobia was happening in the time it was, but it was. It was. Even though gay rumors has contributed to the start of Rainbow Direction, they've made it more than clear that the movement is shipping free. I do think that a lot of hate in the earliest days of the band was around Larry, especially in a homophobic sense. I think it's just like people couldn't understand queer visibility for what it was and what it needed to be, and kind of blamed it on people only wanting to show queer visibility for the Larry ship or as it related to the Larry ship, which is definitely not the case.
There's so much more to the queer aspect of One Direction fans outside of Larry.
I don't think you can have these conversations without like mentioning it as like a catalyst for what it became.
Yeah.
But I think that it's like disingenuous to credit it for what the community has become. Like a lot of what I'm talking about isn't about, or like what we've talked about isn't about that specifically. It's about our experiences and our own, like finding our own identity and like the community.
Anytime one of the boys does something that's like related to being queer, like if Harry waves a pride flag, if Louis interacts with a queer fan and helps them like by signing their pride flag or something, it doesn't immediately make me think, oh my God, that means they're in a relationship together.
Right. In my opinion, I think the way that I want to look at it is like, if they are queer and we're giving them the space to feel comfortable and safe as musicians and as public people, that's great. That's amazing. But it's just not the whole big reason why rainbows at shows and other projects for queer visibility are so important and have been so important for a long time. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Rainbow Direction wants nothing to do with shipping, because I think that's really important. What they do goes so much bigger and more beyond that, and I think they have something really special, so it just speaks to their credibility even more so as well. I think it makes a lot of sense that they would ask people to leave shipping at the door. The Take Me Home from Narnia blog quickly brought together a diverse group of fans, and together we did petitions, educational actions on our blogs and social media, responding to news articles also, and it's mainly in the way we tried to make space for LGBTQ+ people in the fandom by getting our voices out there. They started like a challenge on Tumblr to see if they could get people to bring rainbows to every Where We Are tour show, and then Rainbow Direction was born. There was people bringing all kinds of stuff to the Where We Are shows. They had like lyrics and rainbows and all kinds of posters and different like even clothes, and of course the flags. They even put some rainbow designs that people brought on like t-shirts and sold them to charity. it all took off even more majorly than anyone was ready for and anyone expected. I can't imagine how it feels to be them in the slightest, because it's like, you really paved the way. I'm so serious. It's so beyond me because they started during the Where We Are tour with only like 20 something participants. And then they ended One Direction's last tour on the road again with like hundreds of participants, including the boys themselves. It helped that the guys in One Direction had always seemed supportive, regularly giving the rainbows the thumbs up and occasionally wearing rainbow items. And then, of course, when Harry first picked up one of our participants' rainbow flags in Vancouver, that summer, things exploded completely. No one had asked for that, no one had expected that either, but it was really validating for LGBTQ+ fans. From that moment on, they didn't only see they had a lot of other fans' support, but they also knew the One Direction guys had their back.
After Harry like lifted the pride flag
in
2015, it was kind of, for me anyway, because growing up I didn't really grow up with that, it was the first time someone like was just like, oh, there's this other thing that you're allowed to be too.
I like still remember the first time he picked up a pride flag in like a One Direction concert and hearing about it and just like near tears.
It's crazy how that was such a like moment, almost like moment in One Direction history, or at least for the fandom, when he picked up that flag for the first time. I feel like all of us who were there in that time can like remember that day. It's crazy how monumental that was. Rainbow Direction ended up getting a lot of media attention too, with like mainstream publications like Attitude and MTV and Gay Star News, which is just incredible for this band with such terribly heteronormative and homophobic media stories in the past to have such an important, hard-hitting campaign like that covered. What started as petitions and educational actions against fandom homophobia became a full-blown safe space for a predominantly queer fandom to explore and learn together. I definitely think that Rainbow Direction and the newfound visibility and empowerment and all that stuff caused a complete shift in the fandom as we grew up with One Direction. And they shifted too. Like, they shifted right alongside of us. There was such a noticeable change in their like little behaviors, and especially songwriting, as we rolled through like 2014, 2015, like their last few projects as a band together. I think the boys having the opportunity to put so much of their own work on their projects is a huge part of their audience changing dynamics. They weren't these super bubblegummy songs about like heterosexuality aimed very specifically anymore, but they were a lot more interpretive. Around Midnight Memories, they started writing their own stuff, and it was very like gender neutral and like almost like sapphic. Like, they would give us all these songs that we could take and interpret ourselves and like use for our own stories, rather than being like, yeah, girl, I love you, that kind of thing.
Like, it felt more honest and just like really open-minded, and the lyrics.
End of the day, you love who you love. It is the sapphic song of the generation.
I think that's also a huge reason why queer people can kind of take up space, because we have these things that, even if they're not supposed to be that way, they're so up for interpretation that we can make it our own, especially because they let us. Like, they've never been like,
this is never said like, actually that is so messed up, right? This is about a girl that I met.
I listen to that song still and I'm like, how is this not about like lesbians? Like, it doesn't make any sense. For some reason, him not using like she and her makes it more lesbian, I guess, because it's like the idea of heterosexuality is kind of like one step removed from his writing, and so it makes it easier for me to like project onto it.
Home, Alive, End of the Day, Fireproof, Story My Life, even. These are songs with lyrics that you want to live in and be shielded by. These are songs with lyrics that people get tattoos on their bodies because of that. I think it's so cool to be able to take someone's art and use it in the way that you need it. And queer One Direction fans needed it in this way. People bringing pride flags, connecting lyrics to their own identity, and finding relationships between fandoms makes me incredibly happy and loved as a queer woman. Although art is subjective to each individual, I always hear people connecting lyrics to their own experiences, causing a shared support system between the fans and the artist. And that's the thing, I think a huge part of the One Direction fandom becoming predominantly queer is the realization that such a community space could be used for that kind of pride. It's like, okay, here's this Rainbow Direction initiative to get people to listen and have the visibility. There are queer people in this fandom. Bring your rainbows here. Let that be seen. And that's exactly when queer people find each other and connect with each other and feel safe with the visibility. And also, One Direction is over here putting out these songs that they wrote that we can take and make into our own art. We can relate to each other about this. So this is a place that we can occupy together. This is a thing that we get to have with each other. So it's almost insane to kind of sit back and watch how drastically the marketing flipped. It's a counteract.
What's important to point out also is that it's like totally different than other like fan spaces I was in at the same time, in terms of like discussions of queerness and like accepting that and things like that. The way that it developed so almost organically with One Direction fans just really like it helped just to have people like that who are, you know, talking about these things, because it's not just a thing that happens in online fan communities. It was specific to this boy band.
All of a sudden, the One Direction fandom, a place that was originally built by heteronormative marketing, becomes a queer safety spot. A hotspot even. And you know, fandom has served as such an identity builder for people for so long. Fandom has always been kind of an identity building thing that you do and that you're a part of. So in a way, it makes sense that it would become a safety space for queer people. That is a space that you can turn to and learn things and explore things about yourself in so many different ways, and it has been for so long. The part of it that's insane is just that queer community happened to be acquired by One Direction. Fandom culture 100% helped me find LGBTQ+ community for the first time. I live in one of the most conservative southern states. Freshman year, I was one of 3 openly out members of the LGBTQ+ community out of a rather large school. If it wasn't for joining groups for One Direction stans, I have no doubt it would have taken me a lot longer to figure some of this stuff out.
Fandom definitely helped me become who I am today. I always felt at home.
Honestly, fandom is the only reason I really felt comfortable like coming out and doing all that stuff was because of the fandom.
Truly, I don't even know how I would have fallen upon like queer discourse without fandom. Tumblr at the time was really important to this like discourse for me personally, is just learning about different sexualities and the different ways that people can present and like finding a label for myself.
So I was an Instagram girl. I was not a Twitter person. I started fandom on Instagram, which really opened the door to figuring out, oh, there's more than just, you know, being straight and being gay. There's more than being a lesbian. There's more than just being cisgendered. But then seeing people my age online being really expressive about it, I feel really kind of A, made me do some research, and B, made me feel a lot more accepted.
Rainbows at shows just kept coming, rainbow projects even. Fan accounts celebrating Pride every single year without fail with these cute little Pride flag, what are they called? Twibbin. Pride flag twibbins around their profile pictures every year. I think it's also important in all of this conversations about fandom and even fan fiction and all the things of that sort, community, talking about it, how it relates to sexuality is just as important talking about it, how it relates to gender identity too.
Being online and figuring out like, hey, you don't really feel like a girl. And I was like, no, I don't. You're like, I don't feel like a boy either. And they're like, here's this new thing that I'm going to tell you about. It's called non-binary, and it's this. And it's like, I was like, oh my God. It was like the first time someone ever told me.
That's the incredible thing about the fandom space is we're all kind of just allowed to explore. You can change your mind a million times. You can do this and that, and it's always going to be okay. And I think that's really important.
Specifically, like with the boys, like I would always see like specifically like Harry dress up like in 2014 and 2015 when he was wearing like his coolish like sheer shirts and stuff. I'd be like, I wish I could dress like that. And then I was thinking, but you can dress like that. And then I realized it was like, no, like I wish I was like able to be feminine in the way that like men are. And that kind of really helped me come to terms with my like gender identities.
I feel like I feel that way sometimes, but now that you say that, I'm like thinking about it and I'm like, yeah, I think like being feminine in the way that a man is.
Yes, yeah, it's exactly that.
So then you sit back and look at all this progression, right? And you start to realize that so much of what makes One Direction obsessive is not even the sexual attraction part. It wasn't even the we want a heartthrob, we want to marry you part. It became about community, experiences, comfort, 100%. Because I think it's a matter of like, this marketing was working for the media.
But it wasn't for anyone who like knew anything.
Right, but for the fans, it was useless because that was not the reason people liked them.
They're my besties. I want to like hang out with them and paint their nails or something.
Exactly. Dude, I just kind of want to be bros with you. Like, I want to smoke a joint with Louis so badly.
Oh my God, literally like life's purpose.
I think at the time I was trying to convince myself that I was like attracted to them. And then I look back on it now and I'm like, no, I was never really like attracted to them. I just kind of like thought they were cool and would love to be friends with them and hang out with them.
That's something that I feel like a lot of people have been telling me too. I feel like that would surprise the general public. So many of us are like, they genuinely just made themselves feel so like relatable and reachable and like someone that you would want to hang out with platonically. I think that's the one thing that from the start, time and time again, even now, that worked for them the best was feeling reachable despite being megastars.
I think that because of the use of like Twitter and Facebook, they were so accessible, and you could see like how genuine they were with people. And I think that created like the comfort. Seeing that happen in real time, I think you just have like a general better connection with them, if that makes sense. Like, 'cause I was like a fan of like the Jonas Brothers, but like I never got into them as much as like One Direction was.
They created such an environment. It was like a way of life. And not only did the boys grow into themselves with us, the shift into a predominantly queer fandom was clearly welcomed by them too. I think we'd be having a completely different conversation if the boys weren't acknowledging these things and being so supportive back. After shows and meet and greets, there would be all these stories about like, oh, Harry took my flag on stage. Did you see Harry on stage? Or so-and-so read my sign. Or Louis was being super supportive and considerate about my transition, and just so many amazing things like that. They were all over the place all the time. One of my favorite things is kind of looking back on those Tumblr submissions when people tell these like long ass stories about how wonderful the boys were.
When I saw my first pride flag at, I don't know if I saw any at Where We Are, but definitely at On the Road Again.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. It felt really good. It felt really good. But yeah, it's euphoric. I keep saying that word, but like I can't explain it. It's some of the happiest days that I've ever had.
So there's this secure environment for queer fans. It's welcomed by the boys. We have this thing that's so comfortable and familiar. We have this space to learn about identity. We have this space to meet other queer people, especially when we might not be able to in real life.
Like all my Twitter mutuals are like the best people ever. And like we talk about like, oh, like, yeah, like, do you know anything about asexuality? Like I'm thinking I'm on the A spectrum. And we just have conversations and we feel comfortable because we're part of a community who is queer positive. And it's because of the environment that the boys have created.
And it doesn't even just stop with One Direction. I think this kind of thing was even amped up in their solo careers because it was slowly becoming a thing throughout One Direction, but then it like solidified and then just becomes the norm in their solo careers. Not only did the existing queer population kind of move over to support them, but we are also constantly drawing in new fans because the space is predominantly queer and people become aware of that and know that and then want to join. Sometimes I think it's really easy to feel like Harry himself sort of pioneered that culture of picking up a flag and like running around on stage. It really feels like it. Rainbow Direction opened up so much room for people to feel okay with bringing flags to the shows, but then Harry sort of took that and made it the expectation. Like in this room, there will be pride, no matter what, and no matter what time it is, no matter what the day is, in this room there will be pride. Harry set it up so people just wanted to come, dance, have a good time, and feel so okay with who they are, and that's incredible.
Your job for the next hour and a bit is to do whatever you want. If you want to sing, you want to dance, do whatever makes you happiest. Please feel free to be whoever you are, be whoever you want to be in this room.
Harry and like all of that helped develop who I am as a person. It's really validating to see the journey from like One Direction and like bringing in queerness and like different things like that to the media, and then having it shift to how Harry is now. Like I almost cried when I saw like him in Pittsburgh and New York City, but I was just like, this is unreal that like you delegate this space for people to be whoever they want to be in the hour and 45 minutes that they see you.
Every time I see Harry interact with a pride flag, it just makes me feel so safe. He's one of the most important people in my life. He's one of the most important people in like a lot of people's lives who like One Direction, who like Harry Styles outside of One Direction. And when he did that, it was like, oh, perfect, cool. This is acceptable. to our favorite person, we're gonna be even more loud. We're gonna be even more proud.
Now, like, if no one else in your life is affirming that part of you, and then suddenly you have this music artist that you've been looking up to for years that affirms that, I mean, that's revolutionary for any person that feels that way.
Not even just in the physical concert environment either. There was a lot of projects that kind of came about that celebrated people being who they are and kind of using art to encourage that kind of security with oneself. Like the entire concept of the treat people with kindness single and music video, for example, find a place to feel good, like it's amazing. And also the Do You Know Who You Are Lights Up campaign is another really big one. I think the biggest thing that helped me accept who I was when Harry released Lights Up and the Do You Know Who You Are campaign began. The entire Fine Line album was something very special to me because of how many conversations it started within the fandom about identity. Like, imagine you have these boys being branded into these heartthrobs for mega straight girls, very specific, like sexist, heteronormative media and all of that stuff, just for you to grow up and into an identity right alongside of them and then see firsthand a space that celebrates queerness. And they do this complete 180, like 1,000,000%, and go against the grain completely. And all of a sudden, this is the place for queer people of all types. Again, I just think it's so funny. It feels like a running joke. Look how far all of this has come, especially the lesbians for Louis part. We have fully acknowledged at this point that a good chunk of Louis' fan base are sapphic women, especially lesbians. And it's become its own thing completely. I love it. There's like merch about it. People have profile pictures about it. There's like the saying lesbians for Louis. So perfect. It's also like people will go to his album signings and have him put like lesbian rights on the album and he'll gladly do it. They're like, I'm here with my girlfriend. And he's like, that's amazing.
Louis has the queerest RuPaul himself does not have as queer fandom as Louis Tomlin did.
That's like, so funny. Oh my God.
It's crazy. Like I am really curious about myself and others of what about Louis in particular drew me to him from the start. Because from the beginning, I have never faltered in terms of being a Louis girl. I couldn't even tell you what it was necessarily. I was just like, that one.
But it's not even just we're sapphic women and Louis is our favorite. We're like die hard for that man.
I just thought he's the prettiest.
Yeah, I've definitely had that conversation.
Me and all the other lesbians I know who like Louis Tomlinson have said that it's because he looked kind of like a lesbian at the beginning, and that I feel like also subconsciously is why I was like, oh, this is the guy I like, because it felt safer to like project like whatever attraction or like attention to this guy on, because he felt like safer in a way.
Solo career-wise, Nyla is also a strong contender for creating a safe environment for queer fans, frequently posing with flags, tweeting support, and writing interpretive lyrics that people can feel safe with. With all of that stuff and the culture of all of that stuff, especially something like Lesbians for Louis, I definitely think we have seen a lot of non-queer people express confusion or even upset at no longer being the majority. It's very interesting to see people who are not used to not being the majority have these reactions to that fact. But it is really important for non-queer people to let us have that thing and let us have that space. For once, just for once, let us have that space, especially considering what One Direction was built off of in the first place. And also considering why the need for visibility had to occur initially.
Really, really happy that I joined the One Direction fandom. And I have never regretted it for a day. You feel safe and like you feel like you really have a big understanding of the community at large.
It became more of an appreciation of the environment that they cultivated and how safe it feels belonging to something so big, but also really intimate.
I just think working on a project like this one is so incredibly important, just so people will understand all the different things that make this our reality. Just such an indescribable feeling. It's such an indescribable feeling. I think the transition away from that very heteronormative marketing to what One Direction fans have become makes so much sense, considering all the things that you know, that we've just explored even, because it's such a community space. We have each other, we have songs to interpret, we have idols who accept us. While it is absolutely wild and crazy, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm really thankful and grateful for that shift, because I just feel like so many of us needed it. And I truly don't know if we'll ever see a shift like this ever again.
Through the darkest night, I hope it brings you peace of mind. I know we'll be alright. No.